A single piece of carbon fiber just triggered chaos inside Formula One. Right after the Australian Grand Prix, Ferrari revealed something so extreme that rival teams immediately started contacting the FIA. Not about a driver. Not about an engine. About a rear wing. A wing that does not simply open like the old drag reduction systems. It rotates, almost flipping its aerodynamic profile when the car reaches a straight, switching from high downforce to what engineers are calling flight mode. And early technical estimates suggest this design could deliver between 8 and 10 km per hour more top speed in the right conditions. In modern Formula One, that kind of gain is enormous. It means easier overtakes, stronger defense, and a completely different race strategy. But here is where the story becomes explosive. The moment Ferrari confirmed the SF-26 would bring this Macarena rear wing to the Chinese Grand Prix, the reaction inside the paddock was immediate. Engineers began analyzing every frame. Teams started asking the FIA technical questions. And according to paddock insiders, Red Bull quickly moved to the front of a growing revolt against Ferrari's design. Because if this system works exactly the way Ferrari believes, the SF-26 might suddenly become the fastest car on every long straight in Formula One. And the reason that terrified rival teams is connected to something that happened during the Australian Grand Prix, a detail almost nobody noticed. But the moment engineers finished analyzing the Australian Grand Prix data, something became very clear inside the paddock. Ferrari had built a strong car. The SF-26 looked balanced, fast through corners, stable under braking, and extremely strong when exiting slow turns. Charles Leclerc pushed confidently throughout the race. Lewis Hamilton, in his first season with Ferrari, looked surprisingly comfortable inside the cockpit. For many fans watching the broadcast, Ferrari already looked like a genuine contender for the championship. But inside the garages, engineers were studying something very different. Numbers, telemetry, speed traces. Because the 2026 regulations changed something fundamental in Formula One. Efficiency on the straights now matters more than ever. Less drag means more speed. More speed means more overtaking opportunities. And during the race in Melbourne, Ferrari looked fast. Very fast. But not the fastest. On the longest acceleration zones of the circuit, one pattern kept appearing in the telemetry. Another team was reaching slightly higher top speeds. Red Bull. Not by a huge margin. Nothing dramatic on television. But enough to make Ferrari engineers uncomfortable. Because in Formula One, small advantages repeated lap after lap become very dangerous. A few extra kilometers per hour at the end of every straight can change the entire dynamic of a race. It changes overtaking windows. It changes battery deployment. It changes defensive strategy. And Ferrari engineers understood something immediately after Australia. Their car had strong traction, strong corner performance, strong race pace. But on circuits with very long straights, they needed something more. More aerodynamic efficiency, less drag, more top speed. And that realization triggered a decision inside Maranello that surprised several teams in the paddock. Because Ferrari already had a radical solution waiting. A concept they had quietly tested earlier in the year during the Bahrain tests. At the time, most teams believed it was simply an experimental prototype. Interesting. Unusual. But probably too extreme to use early in the season. But after studying the data from Australia, Ferrari changed the plan. They accelerated the development timeline. They prepared multiple configurations of the system. And they made a bold decision. They would bring the Macarena rear wing to the Chinese Grand Prix. And the moment that information began circulating through the paddock, rival engineers started paying very close attention. Because if the early data from testing was accurate, Ferrari's new rear wing was not just another upgrade. It was something that could completely change how the entire grid fights on the straights. But the moment rival engineers saw how this rear wing actually behaves, the reaction inside the paddock changed completely. At first, many teams thought the nickname was just a joke. The Macarena. It sounded exaggerated. Something invented by journalists. Something harmless. But when the first slow-motion footage from testing began circulating between teams, the laughter stopped. Because Ferrari had not simply modified the rear wing. They had reinvented how the entire component behaves at high speed. In a normal Formula One system, the rear wing only opens slightly when drag reduction activates. A small slot appears. Air flows differently. Drag decreases a little. Top speed increases slightly. It is effective, but controlled. Ferrari asked a completely different question. What if the wing did not just open? What if it rotated? And that is exactly what they built. Instead of a small movement, the main aerodynamic plane of the wing rotates dramatically when the car enters straight line mode. Not 10 degrees. not 20. The movement is enormous. The wing can rotate between roughly 180 degrees and nearly 270 degrees. That means the aerodynamic profile of the wing almost flips upside down. In corners, the wing behaves like a normal high downforce component. The rear of the car stays planted, stable, predictable. But the moment the driver exits the corner and accelerates onto the straight, everything changes. The system activates. The wing rotates. Airflow reorganizes across the rear of the car. And the most important effect appears immediately. Drag almost disappears. Engineers inside the paddock started describing the system using two simple terms: corner mode and flight mode. Because when the wing rotates into straight configuration, it nearly produces lift instead of downforce, dramatically reducing aerodynamic resistance. The result is exactly what Ferrari was chasing: speed. And a lot of speed. Some early technical estimates suggest the concept could deliver between 8 and 10 km per hour more top speed compared with more conservative active wing systems. In Formula One, that kind of gain is enormous. It can decide overtakes before drivers even reach the braking zone. It can allow a driver to attack while using less electrical energy. And it can make defending almost impossible for the car ahead. But the moment rival engineers realized how aggressive the rotation actually was, the conversation inside the paddock changed. Because the question was no longer just about performance. It became about the rules. The 2026 regulations allow active aerodynamics. Front wings and rear wings can change configuration between corner mode and straight mode. But Ferrari's interpretation pushes that concept further than most teams expected. Much further. And that is exactly why Red Bull began leading discussions behind the scenes. Because if Ferrari truly found a way to erase that much drag on the straights, the competitive order of the entire championship could change almost overnight. And this is where the situation inside the paddock started to escalate. Because in Formula One, when one team introduces a radical innovation, the rest of the grid reacts in two very predictable ways. They try to copy it, or they try to slow it down. When Red Bull engineers analyzed Ferrari's Macarena rear wing in detail, they quickly understood something important. If the system worked exactly as Ferrari expected, the advantage would not be limited to one circuit. It could become a weapon across several tracks on the calendar. Think about circuits like Monza, Baku, Las Vegas, Spa, tracks where long straights dominate the lap. On those circuits, aerodynamic drag becomes the single most important performance factor. If Ferrari can reduce drag more aggressively than anyone else, their car suddenly becomes extremely difficult to defend against. Imagine the situation. A Red Bull exits the final corner slightly ahead of a Ferrari. Normally, that position would be safe. The Red Bull driver covers the inside line. The straight arrives. The car behind struggles to close the gap. But if the Ferrari activates the Macarena system and instantly gains several extra kilometers per hour, the dynamic changes completely. The Ferrari closes rapidly, meter by meter. The braking zone arrives. And the overtake becomes almost inevitable. That possibility is exactly what triggered concern inside several teams. Because the predicted advantage of 8 to 10 kilometers per hour is not a small improvement. In Formula One terms, it is enormous. It can completely reshape overtaking dynamics. It can change how drivers deploy electrical energy during a stint. And it can transform how teams approach race strategy. But the concern inside the paddock was not only about speed. It was also about how the system behaves structurally. Because when a rear wing rotates through such a large angle, engineers immediately start thinking about something very sensitive in Formula One: aeroelasticity. That is the phenomenon where aerodynamic forces slightly deform parts of the car under load. Sometimes the deformation is tiny, almost invisible. But even a small flex can change how air flows across the wing. And Formula One has seen this situation before. Flexible front wings, moving floors, rear wings bending under load. Every generation of regulations eventually discovers a gray area. So when Ferrari's Macarena wing started circulating through technical discussions, several teams began asking deeper questions. How stable is the structure at maximum speed? Does the wing behave exactly the same under aerodynamic load? Could it flex slightly during the rotation phase? Those questions do not automatically mean the system is illegal. But they place the design right on the edge of the rulebook. And whenever a design sits on that edge, the paddock reacts quickly. Teams begin talking to the FIA. Technical clarifications are requested. And discussions begin about whether the interpretation of the rules matches the intention behind them. According to several insiders, Red Bull quickly became one of the teams pushing those conversations forward. Not a formal protest. Not an official accusation. but a growing series of technical questions directed toward the FIA. Because if Ferrari's interpretation is correct, other teams may need to redesign their own rear wings. And if it is not, the FIA may need to introduce limits on how far active aerodynamic elements are allowed to move. That is why the Chinese Grand Prix suddenly became far more important than anyone expected. Shanghai is one of the most revealing circuits on the calendar when it comes to aerodynamic efficiency. The lap begins with long sweeping corners that demand stability and downforce. But later comes the famous back straight. More than a kilometer of full throttle acceleration. Drivers remain flat out for several seconds. And during those seconds, aerodynamic drag becomes the most important factor on the entire car. If Ferrari's Macarena wing truly enters flight mode on that straight, the SF-26 could suddenly appear much faster than its rivals. And if that happens, the reaction from Red Bull and the rest of the grid could become much louder.